All right. At some point last week, I was reading an article on, I think it's called Cheeseburger or something to that effect. It's this unknown newspaper that sends me articles that it knows I'm going to like. And one of them was about a young girl that started her first job. And because it was her first job, her boss treated her like she didn't matter. Worse than, I would say, a slave. And so he started making her make his coffee every morning. And in silent protest, she did it, but she made certain that every time she made the coffee that the cup was as filthy as humanly possible. I don't recommend doing this, but it goes to show that resistance of the proletariat is always there. Back during the I want to say slave days, but we're still in the slave days. This is what people would do. They'd slow down, they'd sabotage equipment, they would eat what they were growing the crops. They would do whatever they could to disrupt the system. When I worked at Walmart, the workers were exactly the same. They slowed down, they ate the merchandise, they stole, and pretty much did everything that they could to make certain that the corporation knew that they were unhappy. The first time I saw this behavior in real life, I had just gotten laid off and I was working at Kroger's, and there was this high school kid who went into the freezer and started trashing the freezers, kicking and punching everything in there because there were no cameras in the freezers. And I was just like, wow, this kid just went wild back here in frustration. And last week I was sitting at my desk and my boss called me, and Gen Z says to me, he looks over the cubicle and he says, "Damn, Millennial Steam, your boss treats you like his secretary." And I was like, yeah, I mean, it is what it is. We're all trapped in horrible jobs. I mean, 65% of us can't find anything better. Gen Z's been looking for another job for the last 6 months, and so have I. When everyone around you is looking for another job, you know you're not in a good situation. All right, so let's get into our opening monologue. I was 18, broke, and just grateful to have a job. But that didn't mean I signed up to be someone's servant. Every morning, my boss would shove a dirty mug at me like I was his personal assistant. No please, no thank you, just pure entitlement. So one day, I stopped washing the mug, just poured his coffee right in with all of the old milk crust and handed it over like nothing happened. He took one sip, gagged, and never asked me for coffee again. I mean, that's brave. I mean, for being a girl, that's still a brass pair, in my opinion. When you go against the grain at work, there's always the possibility that they're going to find some reason to get rid of you. They're always looking, and I have these conversations all the time at my job, and you're kind of just like, you do realize it's not my fault, and they're just kind of like, well, I'm going to make it your fault. Why didn't you wash the mug? And you're like, I'm not your dishwasher. And it can end at that, or it can turn into a situation where it becomes uncomfortable to be at work. It's one of the main reasons why Mello stopped working at her retail job, is they just made her job miserable and she couldn't get promoted. It's just like Gen Z. It's like, I tell them every day that this is a job that's impossible not to get in trouble every day for something that's not your fault. It's just the way of the world. Sometimes your job just doesn't think that you deserve better treatment at all. And that's why so many of us are stressed out of our minds at work, because not only do we not like it, we're poor and we're looking for something better. But until you find something better, you're kind of stuck in that place while it makes you more miserable than you already are. All right, let's get into our first talking point: the power imbalance between young workers, especially Gen Z versus their boomer bosses. And the reason I keep bringing this up is because I see it every day. Young people show up at work fresh out of college. The ink isn't even dry on their college degrees. In fact, we're just, what, less, about 45 days from another graduating class from ASU. That means that 10 to 20,000 More Gen Z are going to flood into a hostile work economy towards them. They don't have the experience, they don't have the grit, they don't have the ability to adapt, but they have shiny degrees that tell them that they deserve more than what they're actually going to get. In fact, I'm going to say this. The college degree doesn't matter anymore. It's what you know, and where you're going and what kind of education you got. As a person with multiple liberal arts degrees, I've never used a single one to make money at work. I've used my trade. Where did I learn to do my trade? Right along my college courses. Something about getting an education in liberal arts made me fearful. My last semester at ASU had me going to career services routinely, making certain that there would be a nice, good job waiting for me after I got out of school. The reality was that I had been set up to fail. In fact, one of my psychology professors told the whole class that we were all failures in our final semester. She told us that we would all fail at life. And I was just like, we just spent $50,000 for this college degree, and you just told us that we chose poorly. And that's exactly what she said. And I'm willing to bet that the vast majority of the students that were in my graduating class aren't doing so hot because most of them didn't have the opportunity to learn a trade while they were doing their liberal arts degree. For some reason, there was always a need for technology workers with liberal arts degrees in the science community at a university. But that's a talk for a different day. All right, let's get into this. Teens are especially vulnerable to exploitation because they're eager to please, afraid to speak up, and don't know their rights. I would say that's absolutely true. When you hire someone that's very young, and I saw this when I was working at Kroger's the first time, is that they would assign a high school kid something to do. In fact, this is what they did to one girl that started working there. They told her to go shake the salad dressings because everything was settling at the bottom. And she went and did it. She did it for like an hour and she came back and she said that it keeps going back down. All the stuff inside keeps floating back down to the bottom. And they had a good laugh. But that shows you the disrespect for young people. Same thing can be said about Gen Z workers when they come into the workplace. They don't want to do ordinary jobs. They want to go straight to management. And it was something that when I was working in retail, the general manager would go to these job unfairs, as I like to call them, and he'd set up his booth and he'd wait for these new grads to come up to his booth and they'd all be really excited about being executives and being CEOs and being the top level people at a corporation. No one was interested in throwing out the trash, cleaning their public bathrooms, or stocking shelves. In fact, they turned their nose up at that kind of work. And he would come back every single time and be like, no one applied to work in my grocery store. And I'm like, these are people who have an education. Why would they throw that all away to work here if they didn't have to? And that was the number one trait that I saw when I worked in retail. If you had a car, if you had any amount of dignity still left, you would not take a job working there. All of your dignity slips out of your underpants when you have to put on that uniform, turn your name tag around, and start stocking shelves with an education. It just isn't going to happen. They will refuse to do that. Gen Z's shown us their workplace participation right now is abysmal. Not only because they can't get the wages they want, but they're not willing to do that bottom level work and be disrespected all day long as educated people. Talking point number 2. Not all resistance is loud. Sometimes subtle rebellion sends the clearest message. Using the dirty mug was a way to say, I'm not your servant without risking the job or causing a scene. It shows how cleverness and courage, even in small doses, can disrupt entitlement. This is something that Um, I've seen more and more articles about where Gen Z's rage quitting. They come into work, they do the work that they were contracted to do, right? When you apply to a job position and you walk in and they tell you, "Oh, this is the job you're going to do." But then you start and you realize what they told you in the job interview that you were actually going to do isn't exactly the job that you're doing. Because in this day and age, if you're not willing to do the job of five other people, well, they don't want you around. And when you question how they can possibly have you doing this many different things while paying you this little bit of money, they'll tell you if you won't do it, someone else will. And that's the thing that really, really grinds my gears about it is that they can post a job for $15 an hour that requires a master's degree and 3 to 5 years of experience, bring you in, and it could be everything about it, the pay, the status, the job title can all be can be a senior level position with entry level pay. But the requirements are so high because they're counting on the desperation of the more educated people in our society to take these low tier jobs. And when people end up taking those jobs, it's best to leave your education off your resume. I haven't put education on a resume in 10 years. Why? It's not worth it. Because either they're going to think you're overqualified, which if you're willing to work for $15 and you're overqualified, it depends on the manager, but usually they'll take you. Because being overqualified means that you can take on larger projects and have the ability, capability, the aptitude to take on those projects, but they're just going to pay you $15 an hour. That's where the true desperation comes from. That's why corporations love to downsize because they can keep their most productive and most uh, desperate workers around. Why pay someone $30,000 a year working full time at $15 an hour when you get them to do the same job for half that amount of money part time with no benefits, no sick leave, and no vacation? That's their ideal candidate. A person that doesn't need money, health insurance, or a day off, or a paid day off. Throughout my entire 20 years of working at the university, I did not receive a single paid holiday or a single day of medical insurance. And it was hard. And now that I have those things, you look back and you wonder, it's like, how do they do this to people? It's easy. It saves them money, therefore, it increases their bonuses. When a corporation saves money, what it's doing is it's giving its most well off workers additional money for saving that money. Whenever they slash workers through layoffs or do a cost analysis on their employees, the more they slash out of the budget, the more money they get. So, with that model in place, of course, there's no respect, no job security, and people are constantly afraid because you're not an asset to the corporation, you're a liability. And that's why so much of today's work is going to be automated because the more they can get automation in there to do more and more jobs, the more they can get rid of what they really don't want. People that need things. People who are going to come into work with a mental health crisis. And that can be for a lot of different things. They may have just gotten into a car accident. Some may have uh, the passing away of a pet, family member, friend. They have bereavement leave, but believe me, 3 days isn't enough when your parents bite the dust and you don't have time to travel to go to their funeral. I don't know how many times just in this past year that I've seen people have to leave work for extended periods of time, unpaid, to go put their parents in the pine box. And so when you look at people and how much they need stuff, it's easy to understand why a corporation doesn't want them around. Talking point number 3, Workers don't quit jobs, they quit being treated like they don't matter. That's really what it comes down to at the end of the day when your boss tells you, I can replace you today with someone right off the street. In fact, when I worked in retail, my boss would go up to the front doors, he'd point at a person, and he would say to me, Millennial Steve, that person will take your job right now if you don't want it. When you have that little control and you're constantly being treated like you should leave, that's really what it was. Every minimum wage job that I've ever had, your boss is more than happy to show you the door. And it doesn't change no matter where you go. The disrespect and the dignity of work has been gone for a long time. I don't know where politicians got the idea that there was dignity in work because it doesn't make sense. There is no dignity in a job that treats you as if you're yesterday's garbage. The pandemic clearly showed us that there were certain people that were allowed to to continue to be with us and other people who were labeled as essential. And with with the pay of people in that bracket, can you imagine being told you're essential and you're making $15 or $16 an hour and then you get hero pay? The audacity of hero pay. Hero pay, at least in this area, was like an extra dollar that they took away as soon as they could, including the time off that you could take if you got the bug. As soon as they didn't have to do that, it didn't mean that it stopped existing. It just meant that they weren't obligated to pay you for getting sick for being essential. That to me blows my mind to this day at how much we learned about society when they sent all of us home and they upped the unemployment benefit to an amount that's absurd. Because during that time, I was only bringing home about $300 a week. And when the pandemic happened, suddenly you had, wait a minute, how does the government know how much money I really know, how much money I really need to live while I'm working nearly full time for $300 a week? That's blew my mind at that point because they knew that it just wasn't minimum wage workers that were losing their jobs. They knew that people who had real bills needed money. Giving people $800 a week showed how much these corporations are taking advantage of all of us. Because $800 to start, right? This is unemployment benefit. It's not for you to live high on the hog. They realized that you needed $800 to maintain what you had, make mortgage payments, make your car payments, keep paying for your kids' college. They knew that regular people would be freaked out by that kind of money because up until that point, I'd never seen that much money before. And it was eye opening. It was shocking to me that the realization that people are underpaid didn't take more priority in our society, that more people just didn't open their eyes and be like, wait a minute, $800 a week? That's what, $4,000 a month? $50,000 a year almost just to survive? To sit at home? That is just incredible. Think about that. I was making what, $13,000 to $50,000 a year working my retail job? And then suddenly you realize, oh my God, this is what it really costs to be alive. Where am I going to get a job that pays that much? I, I don't see them on Indeed, at least not without ridiculous amounts of experience and advanced degrees. All you see on Indeed is the trash, the service industry jobs, the jobs that people take because they have to, because they're young, because they don't have the experience. And the worst part about this whole thing, about this entire video, is that you're going to go work for an evil corporation that doesn't want to invest in you at all. When you start at a job that makes $20 an hour, let's say. They want you to come in on day one and do that job. They're not going to offer you a training program. They're not going to offer you mentoring. They're not going to offer you anything other than a chance to sink or swim. And of course, Gen Z is going to sink right down to the bottom of the public pool where they'll have to reach around underwater and grab the first Snickers bar that they can get. And boy, believe me, you don't want to eat the Snickers bar from the public pool.